All right. Hey, everybody. I am here with Liz Harden, who is a sleep guru. I'm going to give her the floor here to introduce herself and let her tell you a little bit more about what she does. Liz, I'm so happy to have you here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I am a pediatric and family sleep coach.
Wow.
So I work with everyone in the family from baby to grandma. Whether you have a baby who's waking up all night long, or a toddler who's resisting bedtime, or a teen who's struggling with their schedule, or if you yourself are suffering from insomnia, that is within our range of things that we help with. So really anyone in the family who's needing sleep assistance, we can help.
So I was hoping, Liz, that today maybe you could help us understand a lot of the dynamics that are going on specifically with young kids. So maybe we could start with talking a little bit about like what does or should sleep look like for infants and toddlers?
There's a really big range in what the expectation should be around sleep, depending on how old the child is. Um, for example, in those first few months of life, newborns should be waking up during the night. Expecting a 1, 2, or 3 month old to sleep through the night is unrealistic. They sleep in spurts around the 24-hour clock. But as babies grow and their tummies get bigger, they get better able to regulate their nervous systems, moving into that like 4, 5, 6 month range. It is perfectly reasonable to expect your baby to sleep some longer stretches at night. And then by the time they are 8, 9 months old through toddlerhood, it's perfectly reasonable to expect them to sleep all the way through the night without needing your help. Um, so it really does shift depending on exactly how old the child is. But one thing that I think is important to understand for all parents is that the best indication of how well your child is sleeping and if they're getting enough sleep is, are they meeting their milestones and what's their mood like? Because I know often, and I see this in parent groups, and in talking with clients and friends of mine, there are all those sleep charts out there that say your 6 months old should be getting 13 to
Yeah,
16 hours of sleep within
right.
24-hour periods, something like that. That is a range that's based off self-reported data. And if your baby is only sleeping 12 hours in a 24-hour period, but they're generally happy and they're meeting milestones, they are doing great. They're getting what they need.
Wow,
Um,
I love hearing that because so many times when I'm talking to parents about development, I'm always telling them we need to look at all development as this bell curve. There are going to
uh-huh.
be some kids that are way up here that maybe need more or doing certain skills up here. There are always going to be some kids down here, and there's always going to be the majority of the kids in the middle. And it's okay for some areas to be here and for some areas to be there and to fall in here. So it sounds like it's
Exactly.
the same kind of thing with
It
sleep.
is it is absolutely the same thing. And that's a great point too. When I say meeting the milestones, I don't mean, they're crawling at the exact same time the baby next door is crawling.
Right, right,
More just in general, are they thriving?
right.
And
Are
if
they
the answer
continuing
is
to move forward? Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And if the answer to that is yes, and maybe they don't nap as much or sleep quite as much at night, no big deal.
So, can you tell me, as they move from toddlerhood into preschooler world, is there a shift or anything that happens in there that you could
Yeah.
maybe speak on a little bit for some of those parents with preschoolers who are like, they're driving me crazy?
Yes. The
Okay.
biggest issue during that shift is there's a period of time when many children kind of both need the nap and don't need the nap.
Right.
And parents, because of the baby years and the toddlerhood years, are very accustomed to their child going to sleep, at 7:30 p.m.
Right.
Guess what? If you have a 3.5-year-old or a 4-year-old who still naps, they are not going to be tired at 7:30 p.m.
Right.
because there's two processes that control sleep. the circadian rhythm or the internal clock and sleep pressure. And as kids grow and develop, they need more sleep pressure before they can reasonably fall asleep again and sleep through the night. And so if a 3.5, 4 year old takes a nap, which diminishes their sleep pressure, and then just 4 hours later, the parents are trying to put them to sleep for the night, they're just not tired enough because their sleep pressure needs to be here to sleep, but their sleep pressure is only here. And so it's really common for
Okay.
kids who are 3, 4, 5 years old who are still napping to not go to bed until not really like biologically be able to fall asleep until 9 o'clock at night. So that is
Right.
the biggest issue. And you often start to see a lot of behavioral problems surfacing because you're trying to put them to bed too early. And so
Yeah.
they're doing every delay tactic they can think of, every stalling, like one more sip of water, one more trip to the potty, one more story, like all the curtain calls, leaving the bedroom. So much of that happens. I see because of parents trying to put them to bed too early. Now, if they've dropped the nap, it's purely probably a behavioral and habit kind of thing.
Right.
But if they're still
Wow.
napping, chances are they're just not tired enough.
Wow. So my mind is blown. I've never heard of the phrase sleep pressure, and I want to know more about this. Like,
Yeah.
this is like, wow. I mean, I've talked to many parents over the years about, well, if they're napping at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and waking up at 5 and you're trying to put them to bed at 7, that's not going to work. But
Yeah.
knowing this term sleep pressure and that there's tell me more about this because I
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
share this
okay.
with families.
So when newborns are when babies are first born and when they're newborns, their sleep is entirely driven by sleep pressure, and it's called homeostatic sleep pressure, and it's just the fact that the longer you stay awake, the more tired you get. And it's because of it's like there's a biological process happening here. It's the buildup of this chemical adenosine in your body. And as you stay awake, the adenosine builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds until you've built so much that you're exhausted and you have to sleep.
Oh,
Well, then you fall asleep and the adenosine flushes out of your system and then you start building it again. And so with newborns who don't yet have a circadian rhythm, their sleep is entirely governed by homeostatic sleep pressure. And that's why they sleep in little bursts around the 24-hour clock, because they don't have the circadian drive saying stay asleep from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. That doesn't develop until it varies from one human to the next, but usually around like 2 to 3 months of age. And that's why you often start seeing babies sleeping longer stretches around that period. Um, but yeah, so if a toddler takes or a preschooler takes a 2 hour nap that's over at 3 p.m., then they've flushed out all that adenosine and they have to rebuild it. And it's also sleep pressure is another reason why sleeping in can be so problematic for kids. Because if you think about it, say this is when you want your kid to go to sleep. This is my air graph here. So you want your kid to go to sleep here. Let's like say that's 7 p.m.
right.
And they're supposed to be building, building, building the sleep pressure all day, right? Till they get to
Right.
7 p.m. Well, if they sleep until, say they usually wake up at 7 a.m., but they had a rough night and end up sleeping until 8:30 a.m. That moves their starting point to here. So now they're not going to reach that level of tiredness at 7 p.m. that you're hoping they are. So it's like thrown their trajectory off.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm a big believer in understanding like the brain processes behind things, the development behind things, because I think as parents, it makes it so much easier then to make sure that the strategies that we're using and the
Yes.
methodology that we're using is developmentally on point, which leads to less frustration for our kids and less frustration as parents because we're now like, okay, now that I know this,
Yeah.
it's not just somebody saying put them to bed later or put them to bed earlier. There's a scientific reason
Yes.
behind this.
Yes.
Wow, that I'm going to be using that one a lot to share
Yeah.
with families.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and it is, the person the family I spoke with this morning, for example, I was explaining to them how, so they have 3-year-old twins, who've been really struggling at bedtime. I know, right? There's
Yeah.
yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
But I was telling them, like, this is the time because they're not ready to drop the nap yet,
Hmm.
but they've been banging their heads against the wall trying to get them to go to sleep at 8. Like, it's just not working.
Right.
And so I was telling them, like, this is the time of life up until they're a good bit older, when you can really embrace that sort of like European mentality of like, we're going to stay out through dusk, we're going to go have a picnic and watch the sunset, we're going to go out to dinner, go to a movie. Like, this is the time you can really do that because they actually need a slightly later bedtime. Um, but then when they drop the nap, they're going to be seeing those like 6:30 to 7 p.m. bedtimes again. And so then the ability to go do that stuff, it's like, yeah, you can still do it, but they might be a train wreck. Uh,
Right.
yeah, yeah. And one thing I should mention though is that, as humans, we all of our internal processes are so unique to us. And there's like these overriding biological things that are happening, but how they present changes a bit from one person to the next.
Sure.
And so there are some kids, just like there are some adults, for whom the circadian drive to sleep is stronger, or
Hmm.
seems to be more dominant than sleep pressure. So there are it you the kid next door may nap, the 4-year-old next door may nap until 3 or 4 and still go to bed at 7 because their circadian drive is so strong that they'd go to bed at 7 no matter what happened. And so, no, like understanding that is important too, because as parents, it's so easy to be like, oh, well, little Johnny next door does this. Why won't my kid do that? And it's because they have different, different needs. Um,
So is the circadian rhythm that you're talking about, is that more that inclination where some of us, like when certain time of night comes along, this is just the time of night that our body
yes,
naturally, because of our circadian rhythm, is saying it is time for me to go to bed.
yes, yes. So there's this alerting system in our bodies that control various events, like when you're tired, when you're thirsty, when you use the restroom, when you're alert, and that internal clock fires off different hormones and chemicals at different times of day to achieve those different goals or those different events.
Mhm.
And so we all have a circadian rhythm. Um, it's just that for some people, it seems to be, to be more dominant than others.
Wow, that's really fascinating to know the difference between those two things, because I have in, 25 years of being a home visitor, I've had some kids where the parents are like, "Yep, 8 o'clock, she is done. That's it, eight
Yep.
o'clock, she goes down." I'm like, "Wow, you're so lucky." Well, so that is probably a baby or a toddler who has a very strong circadian
Yes.
rhythm.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes,
Wow.
exactly. And ideally, when you're thinking about your child's sleep, if you can get the homeostatic sleep pressure and the circadian rhythm to sort of line up and be in sync, then that's when they have an easier time falling asleep and they stay asleep longer. They have higher sleep quality. Because when those two systems are like jiving with each other, then sleep
That's
tends to be
that's
better.
like parental perfection right there, right?
Yeah.
Parents are
Yep.
like, "Oh."
Yep. Yep. Yep.
All right, you
Wow.
guys, I hope you enjoyed this and found this information helpful. Until next time.